Hi, it's MB. How are we doing today? It's Mr. V here. And as you know, we're experimenting with this flipped classroom idea. So I know this is a little tough on everybody and it's a little bit different, but we're a few weeks in, so we're going to continue with it. Now what we're going to be doing today is the Greco-Persian Wars. Now we've already touched a little bit on Greek democracy and we've already touched a little bit on antiquity and so forth. It's really crucial that we get through this and we really understand this as a foundational thing in wider Western civilization. Okay, so the Greco-Persian Wars. Greco-Persian Wars. Now you'll notice that I say wars because there are actually two wars, okay, not just one. So the first one is about the year 490 BCE. Now remember, this is ancient history, so we're moving backwards through the timeline. So we go 498, 497, 496, 495, etc. till we get to about the year 0, and then we start with 1, 2, 3, 4 to 2014. So it's in about the year 490 BC. That's the first war, okay? So the first war in about the year 490 BCE. Remember, we're not using BC anymore. It's not before Christ. It's before Common Era. That's a historical kind of convention that historians are using nowadays. And the second war happened in around the year 480, about 10 years later, and they were fought by different kings, but essentially, the same bad guy. Now, who are these bad guys? Who are we talking about? So, who's who in the Greek world around the year 500 BC? I'm going to move this across. I don't need these just for the time being, so we're just going to leave them right over there. Okay, so who is who? So, the first one, we have the Persian Empire. Some of you might have seen 300, you might be familiar with this idea, but we're really going to try to unpack it and try to sift through what's good and what's actually. So, we're back. Right, so we're looking at the vast Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire really started, I think I'm going to go blue with this one, around here. This is the actual area of Persia today. You might know this as, my geography is kind of iffy, that's Iran. That's modern day Iran. Iran, until about 100 years ago, was actually called Persia. For political reasons, it was changed. We're not going to get into it. But the area we're looking at is Greece. This is our battlefield. Now, the Persian Empire started about 200 years before us, before the area time we're talking about, around the 700, 650 BC, and it basically started out as this little tribe, and then started conquering big areas. So it conquered cities like, what are we doing? I'm going to go red. Started blue, conquered Babylon, conquered Mesopotamia, conquered Egypt, conquered Israel, Palestine, and it conquered this area. This little area here is called Ionia. It's modern Turkey. It's the coast of Turkey today. It used to be called Ionia, filled with Greek cities, colonized by Greeks from the mainland. So, and we're talking about an empire that goes up to modern Afghanistan. It's got all of Pakistan. It's got a bit of the Caspian Sea area. This is an enormous empire, and we're talking about this versus that. So that's the Persian Empire. Now, who's the second group we're talking about? We're talking about none other than the Greeks. But what's interesting, what should be noted actually, about the Greeks and the Persians, the Persians were this big, humongous monarchical empire. They were run by a king, basically an emperor, but he called himself the King of Kings. So he had a number of subsidiary kings, like the Pharaoh in Egypt and so forth. So it was a big monarchy, huge empire. Greece, on the other hand, was basically looking like this. It was just a patchwork of different independent city-states. Now, one reason for this is the geography of Greece. I'm going to show you an image in a second. Actually, I think I'm going to do that right now. Here is Greece. Now, you can't see it, but Greece is actually covered all these tiny little mountains. And it's such a small area. And for that reason, the city-states which emerged were culturally kind of different, linguistically kind of same but kind of different as well. They were constantly fighting each other for resources. And the area is just really mountainous. It's the most gravelly place you've ever been in your entire life. So that was Greece. Now there are two major areas of Greece that we want to talk about, two major cities, okay? So the first one is Athens. Athens is a rising star around the year 500 BCE. It's a democracy. It's the first of its kind in the world that we know of, and that's really, really important. Now, what is a democracy? A democracy is a special kind of government which we have here in Australia, in the United States, in Britain, in Europe, and in Japan and so forth, all over the world. But it really started here. Now, to understand a democracy, you have to understand the rest of the world at this time. Most of the world was divided up into a number of different, I'm going to move Persia over, move that over and move over, I said. Keep the Greeks up here. So who do we have? We've got Athens, and I'll get to the rest later. Now, the major type of governments is your oligarchy. Now, an oligarchy basically means power to the few and the rich. Very often these people were the nobility. The nobility were the aristocrats. So these are people who own land, they're very wealthy, they ran the city, they had all the economics. These are the people who ran the city-states in pretty much all of Greece. Now around the year 500 BCE, things started to change in Athens. Athens said, we've had enough of this. The oligarchs, the aristocrats have controlled us for far too long, so they basically employed two men, and I'm really oversimplifying Greek democracy here, but they employed two guys to really change everything. And these guys were named Solon and Cleisthenes. You don't have to worry about their names just yet. Cleisthenes and Solon basically said, we're going to write up a new constitution and we're going to change things. Everyone has the vote. Everyone has a say in government. Everyone has power. We're going to elect our officials. We're going to, and it's going to be based on merit. It's not going to be based on birth. This is a radical change of government. Alternatively, you've got another city-state which I really want to talk about, Sparta. Now you've all heard about Sparta. These are guys with excellent abs, red cloaks, big spears, awesome kind of helmets. These are the Spartans. And it's not completely wrong. The Spartans were also an oligarchy monarchy. They had two kings, which is kind of interesting. But these guys were a brutal kind of people. Now I'm not saying they were savages, but for example, they were all full-time professional soldiers and they actually enslaved all the Greeks in this area of Messenia. Okay, so they ran what you might call a totalitarian state. Very few freedoms, very few rights. It was not a nice place to live. Okay, but again, no oversimplification. So this is what we're talking about. Sparta and Athens, and of course you've got a number of other Greek city-states and kingdoms. So you've got Macedon, you've got Thebes, Corinth, plus about another 300. So I mean 300 is actually a conservative number. There are probably close to 1,000 different Greek city-states, Greek city islands. And again, if you just look at this picture, you're going to say that there are all these little islands. Each one of these were a separate, independent city-state or a kingdom. Right, so we've given you a bit of a rundown. So we've got the Greeks, we've got the Athenians, and the Persians, and the Spartans, excuse me, and a bunch of other city-states, which will come, they'll be important later on, trust me. We've touched on oligarchy, we've touched on monarchies, and we've touched on democracy, the really big one, the fundamentally game-changing one. Why did why did this attack that? Well, like most things in the world, it's basically just politics. It's all politics. Politics and business. What happened was, and I'm going to get a better one. Here with Greece, now this whole area is Persia. It's run by King Darius. Okay, I'm going to just chuck his name up there. Kicks. So Persia is run by King Darius. That's a D, not a P. Alright, so King Darius and Persia. So what we have, in 499, the year is 499 BCE, the Ionians revolted. They got really upset, they were sick of Persian rule. Now Persian rule actually wasn't that bad. The Ionians were basically allowed to live the way they wanted, do whatever they wanted. It wasn't the most terrible thing in the world. What really happened though was the Ionians, it's important to understand the Ionian-Persian relationship. The Persians didn't rule over them directly. That's not how the Persians rolled, so to speak. What they did is they would elect a tyrant. That's another word I want you guys to really think about. The word tyrant. Now, in the modern day, tyrant has a really bad connotation. In Greece, yes and no, not so much. A tyrant was basically just a ruler. He didn't have to be democratically elected. And in the Persian case, they would usually go into a city, find the most popular guy, or not necessarily the most popular guy, and say, you're the tyrant of the city, you're ruling on our behalf. You collect the taxes, you keep everyone in line, everybody's happy. Sounds good? Fantastic. Now one of these tyrants was the tyrant of the city of Miletus. Scroll you over there, scroll you over there. Miletus. And his name, Aristogoras. I'm not going to really bore you with the life of Aristogoras, because his life is actually kind of boring. But what he did in around the year 490, in the 490s was pretty important. He basically tried to conquer one of the little Greek city-states. It buckled horribly. And when he realized that the Persians were probably coming to arrest him, he basically said to the rest of the Ionians, alright guys, time to get rid of the Persians. So here's a guy who made a mistake, and now everybody has to pay for it. And if you want to know where Miletus is, like I do, now I think it's good at this point in time for me to introduce one of my favorite friends in the world, Herodotus. This guy he's the reason we know all of this, you know. I know that some of you might be thinking, well, Mr. V just knows everything. Well, that's not true. I got it all from Herodotus. All historians get history from primary sources, and Herodotus is quite the source indeed. I'm going to actually show you a picture of Herodotus. He's got an epic kind of beard. Look. Let's make him bigger. On Herodotus. So that's Herodotus. He's known as the father of history. So it's a pretty big deal. Now history up until the point of Herodotus had basically been myth-making. You know, it's stories about the gods intervening, Achilles and the Trojan War, and Jason and the Argonauts. It's all Zeus and Athena and Ares dabbling in the affairs of human beings. Not so with Herodotus. He's the first guy who said, you know something? No. We're going to try to actually document human actions, politics, reasons for why they do things, and we're going to try to take out this divine agency. So let's get rid of it, let's do real history. Now, granted, Herodotus' attempt at history wasn't the most perfect. I mean, he's got a lot of mythology in here as well. But for the most part, it's pretty good. Now, Herodotus was, he wasn't actually from Greece. I'm sorry, he was from Greece. He was actually from Ionia, one of these little cities that we're talking about. It's not a bad map. There we go. Let's see if we can make that bigger. Alright, so it's actually from around this area. There's a city called Halicarnassus. It's a pity it's not there, because it's a bit of an awesome city-state. Halicarnassus. They really knew how to name things back then. Not like Melbourne or Sydney or anything like that. So he's from the city-state of Halicarnassus, and he's born actually during the time of the Persian Wars around his 20s, and he starts writing this when he's about 50. So about 30 years later, he starts talking to a lot of people, he starts gathering information, you know, eyewitness accounts, were you there at the Battle of this one, or were you there when the Persians were defeated, or whatever. That's the kind of historian we're talking about. And he's really well-travelled. Like, I haven't got a map. Actually, I do have a map. What am I talking about? He's from here, but he went to Greece. He went up this area, like modern-day Ukraine, the Crimea. So this is the modern area. He was well-travelled. He went to Egypt. He saw all of the East. He spoke a number of languages. He was a cosmopolitan kind of guy. This is awesome. So what I'm going to do for you, I'm going to read you some Herodotus. I'm going to read this. Now, a bit of a background information. The capital of the Persian Empire in here was Sardis. There you have it, Sardis. Alright, so reading from Herodotus, Book 5, 105. Now, you guys will be reading some Herodotus as well, so don't fret. But I'm just trying to show you some actual primary source history. I'm going to read some, I'm going to see how everything works. Okay. When the Greeks were busy with the siege, news was brought to Darius that Sardis had been taken and burned by the Athenians and the Ionians, and the prime mover of the joint enterprise was Aristogoras of Miletus. The story goes that when Darius learned of the disaster, he did not give a thought to the Ionians, knowing perfectly well that they would be punished for their crimes. But he asked how the Athenians were, and on them, and being told, called for his bow and arrow. He took it, set an arrow to his string, shot up in the air, and said, "Gods, may I punish the Athenians." Then he commanded one of his servants to repeat the words forever, for the rest of his life, "Master, master, remember the Athenians." And he repeated this 3 times a day whenever he sat down to have dinner. Now that's kind of like Herodotus. I mean, we don't. How could Herodotus have actually known that it happened? It's questionable. However, we're getting a good idea. The Ionians, they're going to be punished, but the Athenians, they're going to get screwed. So the Ionian revolt. Ionian revolt. So about 499 to about 493 BCE. Lasted for about 6 years, and it was helped. The Ionians were helped by the Athenians. The Ionians called up to the Athenians and said, "Can you help us, please? We're dying." And the Athenians said, "You know something? Sure, why not? Screw the Persians." Now it lasted for about 6 years, but it eventually culminated in the destruction of the of the Ionian revolt. The revolt was crushed. A Persian army came in, smashed them to pieces. End of story. Not quite. The next year is 492. Now the Persians, understandably, were quite pissed off. So they decided to conquer and invade Greece. That's not a good thing if you're an actual Greek. So where are we? We're going to do this one. Okay, alright, so the Persians came through here, massive army, and they crossed here, basically came all the way down to Greece. Sorry for the shadows. And they beat everybody. Like, this is an enormous army, like tens of thousands. The Greeks are tiny little Greek city-states. The Greeks started to really worry at this point, and they didn't really know quite what to do. They really hated each other. The Spartans hated the Athenians, hated the Corinthians, hated the Thebans. Nobody liked each other. So when it really came to it, and when the Persians are basically coming down to Athens, and Athens is it's in a bit of trouble, the Athenians basically mustered up their courage and said, we're going to have to fight them ourselves. So in the year 492, the Athenians mustered up all the soldiers, about 10,000 of them, and they put their soldiers at a area, like a little beach area, which today is called Marathon. And importantly, that's what they called the Battle of Marathon, as you might expect. And it was fought in about August 492, and we have about, say, 10,000 Athenians versus about 30,000 Persians. And this was a really mismatched battle. Now, I actually got a should show you, because I think it'll be pretty cool. No, I don't actually. It's all good. So, the Athenians and the Persians went to battle. Now, the Athenians thought to themselves, how are we going to do this? So what they did is they went onto a beach area and they funneled their soldiers into like a bottleneck, where the Persians, who had a lot more soldiers, couldn't use their numbers to maximum advantage. It's a theme we're going to see repeated in Greek history. Remember that map I showed you with all the little mountains? It's very mountainy. You're going to use your terrain to your advantage. Think of buying property like 5 years from now. Location, location, location. It really matters. Another point that I should point out is that the Persians, who had this vast empire, wore really light armor. It was kind of like a mix of wood and leather, not too strong. They carried little swords. That's basically it. Whereas the Greeks were, hoplites. These guys were made of metal. They carried bronze shields and spears. And really, the Persians had never come into the contact with the Greeks too much, and the Greeks had never really come into the contact with the Persians. And the battle was just a disaster for the Persians. They were smashed to pieces. The Athenians slaughtered them. I think the Athenians boasted that they only lost like 200 soldiers in the entire battle of 10,000, whereas the Persians were just annihilated. Now, so bad was it that the Persians ran all the way home and just left them. And Greece was saved. Essentially, that's what happened. The Athenians had gone up against the might of the Persian Empire, and they'd won. Fantastic. And the Athenians were quite well aware of their little victory. Here is, it's a little blurry, sorry, but here is your average Greek. And here's your Persian. So, evidently, they're not really getting along too well. Now, we're about to go on a break. The last thing I want to tell you about before we go on a break is just a little tidbit of history. It's called marathon. In the modern Olympics, you've got the last leg of the entire Olympics, the last event is always the marathon run. It's about, 46 kilometers, about that, yeah? And guys basically just run it. It's huge, it's humongous, nobody can really do it. Now, it's actually drawn from this. Now, this isn't really history, it's kind of like pseudo-history, it's a bit of myth-making. The myth goes that when the Greeks won the Battle of Marathon, they sent a guy named Pheidippides. Again, you don't really need this, but this is just kind of fun. He ran all the way to Athens, ran into the Acropolis, which is their sort of like, think of it as like a Federation Square of the Athenians. Runs into the Acropolis. Everyone's on their tippy toes. Like everyone's really excited or scared. They don't know what's going on. They don't have mobile phones back then. There's no CCTV or anything like that. No smartphones, definitely. And he runs into the Acropolis, raises his hands and says, "Nike," which is Greek for victory, and then he collapsed and died from exhaustion. So that's the origin of the marathon run. Kind of cool. Alright, so alright, 10B. We've been talking. I've been talking for ages. I need to take a bit of a break. There's still a second half to this video, but again, you're not going to just sit back and do nothing. So what I want you guys to do is, I'm going to move all this aside. Yeah, I'm going to move all this aside, and what I want you to do is to summarize about half a page. You can do more, minimum half a page. Half a page paragraph of what you've just learned. Or you can, alternatively, you can give me one full page of dot points. Okay, so alternatively, you can give me a full page of dot points. I recommend you take about 5 to 7 minutes to do it, but please don't stress yourselves out. Go, take a break, get a glass of water, stretch your legs. I know I'm about to have a glass of water. We'll run over you back in a couple of minutes, and I want to see this done. This is homework. I do expect to see it in class. Okay, and we are going to be sharing some of our dot points. Okay, so no passive learning here today. Right, I'll see you guys in a couple of minutes.